foster care and unparalleled journey.
Well, we'd like to talk about all things kid-related, whether it's foster kids, bio kids, adopted kids, step kids, or anything else. I think the information you'll learn here will be very valuable. We'd like to bring you guests who have either been foster kids themselves, lived with foster kids, or maybe even people who are helpers, like psychologists and caseworkers. If you have a story that you'd like to have highlighted on our show, please feel free to contact me at fostercareuj@gmail.com. We can chat and set up a time to do an interview. I'd love to be able to tell you your story. We're here to inspire you to become the best parent that you can be, whether that is a step parent or bio parent or foster or adoptive. What we really want to do is change the world for the better and leave it in a better place than we found it. Now on to the show. Welcome back, Foster Care Nation. You've found Foster Care, an unparalleled journey with Jason and Amanda, where we like to talk about foster care and adoption. We also like to tell stories to encourage, educate, and inspire others who are in the foster care or adoption arena. Be sure and run over and check us out at fostercarenation.com, where you can find links to all of our socials. The biggest thing you can do to support us is to be sure and share us with a friend. If you happen to have a couple extra dollars and you'd like to support us, we have a Patreon account. It's patreon.com/fostercarenation. We promise to only use the money to buy Pop-Tarts by the pallet because, seriously, we have a lot of kids. If you'd like to share your story with us, contact us at fostercareuj@gmail.com. We'd love to share your story as well. Today, Carolyn Ritenour is going to tell her story about being a bio mom in the adoption triad. Hi, and welcome back to Foster Care, an unparalleled journey with Jason
and Amanda.
Today we are here with Caroline Ritenour. How are you doing today, Caroline?
Hi, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Hey, it's great to have you on here. I ran across you, I believe, in a Facebook group. Is that right?
I think so. My friend Lauren actually told me about what you guys were doing, and I work with Lauren on a project, so I decided to reach out to you, I think.
I remember talking with Lauren about that project. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that was one of the things that really interested us as foster parents, learning how to understand all the sides of it. I looked at that and went, yeah, that's something that needs some more attention in this world.
Are you talking about our retreats that we do? Or
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Just making sure. So I help facilitate retreats for women who have post-placement, so have made adoption plans, whether that is through their own choice or through like a CPS situation, so that they have a place to, a safe space to talk about what's going on and to build a community of women that understand what it's like and that get it, and where you can talk unfiltered about what's going on. So, which is probably the most important part, what we do. So the nutshell of it.
Yeah, as foster parents, we found it's really easy to walk in. And now, I mean, mind you, we've had a couple cases that the stories would curl your toes a little bit. We've had a couple biological moms who did serious jail time for the stuff they did.
And dads.
And dads as well.
Yeah, and dads, yeah, sure.
Mostly what we've found in our experience has been that the dads were you mostly just completely missing and absent. Really don't know their story much at all, because if you knew who dad was, he wasn't around. But but a couple of our cases had some moms who did some really nasty stuff, pretty nasty, terrible abuse stuff that probably leads back to some mental health issues from what we could tell. Yep. But those stories are really easy to look at somebody. Just let it eat into your soul a little bit and say, how can you do that? How could you do that to a kid?
It's very easy to be judgmental.
And
yes.
that's something that we find can really step into all those different circumstances. It's really easy for us to make those judgments about people and assume that these people are bad people.
Right.
And that'll bleed over into cases where that may not be the case.
Yeah, for sure. I know for my situation, when I decided to not parent my daughter and made an adoption plan, and it was made public on social media, after the fact and things. It was, people said really nasty things, and I'm sitting there just in disbelief because I chose her parents, right? Like I knew that I was not the best person to be her mom, and her dad was not around, and that I went out and I actively made good choices for my child, right? Like, and made decisions that would affect her life for the better. And then these people that, whether they knew me or not, would say nasty things. Like, and I'm like, wait a minute, like I did a good thing for her. Like I did good. Like I'm proud of this because I know, like, I would have been a good mom, and I know those things, right? I love her dearly. But I knew I wasn't the best mom. And I went out and I chose the best people I could find for her with what I wanted for her life. And that shouldn't be shameful or judged on. That shouldn't be like rewarded either, but it should be respected and honored and acknowledged at the very least, right? Like that. There's a lot of people out there that parent that maybe shouldn't be parenting. And then if you can recognize in yourself that you're making a better choice for your child, like, why is that a bad thing, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah, there's definitely people out there that should not be parents, but they are. Yeah. And they're screwing up every day, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's tough. And it's hard when you're good with kids, right? And people are like, oh, you're so good with kids, though. And you're like, but that doesn't mean I'd be a good mom. Like, I don't, like, it's not where I'm capable of. Like, I know myself well enough to know that would have not been the right choice for either of us, and for her. And I didn't want to mess her up any more than, I humanly could help. I know we all mess our kids up when we parent, but like, that's just part of being a parent, right? You make your best choices you can, and sometimes they're good and sometimes they're bad. But if I could make a really good one from the start, she had a way better shot than me struggling through whatever choices I was always trying to make, kind of thing. So. Well,
I'm curious, how old were you when your daughter was born?
So I was 29. So I was a lot older than like even the stereotypical. So most people assume that women that make adoption plans are like 16-year-old teenagers, and that's really not the case. Most 16 to 20-year-olds are still at home with their parents, and their parents help raise the kids until they're ready to parent fully. So they end up parenting more. So it's mostly women in their mid-20s that are in college, or and they're just not ready to be moms yet, even though they know they want to be. Or a lot of them are moms already with multiple children, and they just can't financially afford another child. And I can't imagine how difficult that decision would be. But for me, I was 29. I knew I never wanted kids, and I got pregnant on accident. And what are you going to do? Right? That was my life. I was 29. I never wanted to be I'd been asking since I was 18 to get my tubes tied, and no one would listen. The doctors all told me I would change my mind. And
you change your mind, you're too young, you're going to want this. And
yes. And I got pregnant, and I was like, what am I going to do? This is not anything that I know that I'm physically capable of, in the long term of another human's entire life. That's not a good choice. So that's kind of where I was at 29, trying to figure it out.
So I'm just curious because, obviously our stories are entirely different, starting with the fact that I have a beard, and so I'm probably not going to have a kid anyways. But how did you know? What part of your life made it so clear to you that you would not be a good mom?
I just always knew. It's an internal, intuitive thing, right? It just wasn't. Now that I'm my daughter's 8 now, so I'm able to articulate things a little differently. I'm really self-driven. The society likes the word selfish, but it's not a negative thing so much, but I'm very in my own head. I kind of navigate on my own path. I do best being self-employed. I like to work when no one else is working, right? I work at 4 o'clock in the morning. I work at, 8 o'clock at night. That's not conducive parenting hours, right? It was that lifestyle. I like a lot of quiet. I like plans. We were talking earlier before we started recording about how this quarantine stuff has rocked my world. I have no schedule right now, and it's killing me, and kids are very unpredictable. And so some of that stuff, right? That spur of the moment kind of thing, that there's just no normal, right? There's no routine. It's always is shifting and changing. That stuff's really hard for me. And I think those are things that always kind of steered me away. But I don't have don't have exactly a right answer. I just knew it was something I never wanted, right? Like that was, if I had to put it in one sentence, I'd say like I always wanted, because I work with kids, right? Like I've always wanted to work with lots of kids, and I only had enough energy to do one or the other. Like I would either be all in with a mom or all in like working with lots of kids. And that's the most energy I had, right? Like if I had to kind of like pull it together into a cohesive thought, would be like there's only enough energy for me to either be an amazing mom or to have a career that works with lots of children. And that was what I wanted, the career with lots of kids more than I wanted the parenting thing, I think, too. So
now, I know
try to,
when it comes to having your daughter adopted, I guarantee you, I don't have this personal experience, but I'm certain there's plenty of people that have a lot of stigma about that.
For sure.
How did you handle that?
I just kind of had to handle it. At the time, I was coaching swimming, so I was pregnant on a pool deck the entire swim season, and there's kids around me that are swimming, and they're seeing me be pregnant and grow this baby, and so I couldn't hide it, right? Like a lot of people I know kind of hid their pregnancy, and I couldn't, right? Like there's nothing I could do to hide it unless I didn't want to work for months, and I just had to learn how to embrace it and explain it and deal with it, and kind of get a little bit of a tougher skin about it. But having those conversations, even with the kids I was coaching, because they wanted to throw me a baby shower, and they wanted to, and all these things because they cared. And I remember talking to my board at a board meeting and saying, I have to tell them I'm not parenting her. Like they're asking me when they can have a baby shower, and that's not fair to these kids, right? Like to these kids, I can't lie to them. Like I'm not gonna like, so we ended up sitting down and telling the kids, and I told the parents first, and then told the kids, and we had a couple people leave the program at the time because of it, which I don't understand what that like. I don't understand.
Not really certain how that affects your ability to coach swimming.
Right? Yeah, like parenting and like I'm trying to make a good decision for my child, and you think I'm a horrible like this. Yeah, whatever. But that was the hardest one, I think, because it was in the moment. Like that one parent that was like
that would probably affect you emotionally quite a bit. I mean, it
did.
Me.
Yeah, I don't want my child around someone that would be so awful. And I was like, what? Like, how does that make sense? Like, I'm making a good decision for my child. Like, that makes no sense. But then on the other hand, there were the parents on the team that were, I'm so glad that my child had the opportunity to know someone who made a different choice besides parent or abortion, right? Like they know now you're a resource. Now they know, because there were a lot of high school kids at the time, like they know what this is an option. They know that this is a choice that they can make if they're faced in this situation. They know they can come to you. So it went both ways, but I didn't have like the answer was I just had to deal with it. Like, and I just had to handle it as it came. And
I know you said you deal with a lot of foster kids. What pushed you in the direction of foster kids? Because I mean, our story, obviously, we've got a lot of kids in our story. Foster kids, it's been something we've done for the last decade or better at this point. But what pushed you in that direction and made that seem like something that you felt was important in your life?
Well, I don't do a lot with foster kids. I have some kids that are foster kids or that have been foster to adopt that do some lessons and stuff with me. I just always knew that after making the decision not to parent, right, like, and then getting my tubes tied, that if I wanted children down the road, I would be a good foster parent. And like, that would be a role that I would feel was much better than parenting, like working with people that need the extra help, right? Like those kind of spaces for me, right? Working with my main primary job is working with kids with special needs, and individuals with special needs and things like that. And like, it's always been working with those that maybe need a little extra help and so that's, I think, where that core passion lies. I do have some kids now in swim lessons with me that have been foster to adopt, and that like they get lessons with me that are funded because of the PASS funds in our state, the post-adoption funds, and they have maybe mental health issues or things like that, and so then they get lessons with me that Job and Family Services covers, which is really cool.
That's amazing.
That's a nice little tie-in. Yeah, I really like that a lot. It makes me feel good. And
yeah, that's really cool because a lot of states don't have funding for that. A lot of, in our state, there's not a whole lot of extra funds for kids to do extracurricular things. That's all, foster parents have to take care of that. The state doesn't have the funds to be like, okay, we can sponsor this or that.
Yeah, this one's this is for after they're adopted, but if they go through a foster to adopt situation, there's some funding there, but and it's limited, right? Like, but it's still kind of cool to have that.
Everything really is limited, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's still interesting to see, because then you get this kid that maybe doesn't have that hand in the world, right? And that can't sit in a traditional swim lesson class, and because of whatever mental health and their background. And then there's someone like me that just kind of I live in that world of, like, you know, a lot of my women, I facilitate retreats with our social workers and so I understand a little bit about what they're going through, and so like I can just make the pool like a safe space for them to, and we work one-on-one, so I can work with that kid where they are that day, instead of, you know, like trying to make them fit a mold of what.
Well, that's so important, because whether or not you're dealing with foster kids or somebody's bio kids, whatever situation, trauma's real.
Yes.
And, you know, kids in foster care tend to have a little bit higher percentage of opportunity to have experienced some serious trauma.
Sure.
But even, you know, how many kids, you know, Amanda's one of them that should have been a foster kid and had all the trauma of that life experience when they were young, but were never in the system. So trauma's a real thing.
For sure.
Is that something that you deal with in your training a whole lot with the kids?
Like working with the trauma side of it?
Learning, teaching some kids how to overcome their fears that's trauma based.
I think that's just part of naturally how I'm wired, right? Like I've had to learn about trauma because of my adoption, right? Like even though I don't ever really feel it was trauma, it was still trauma, right? And learning how to deal with those pieces myself, and reading and educating myself, and now I have tools to work with these kids, whether it's like even like with a child that maybe had a near drowning experience, whether it's foster care or not, right? There's still all this trauma around that. So like having to work through all those things, and you just start with one kid and you figure it out, and you start the language you use, right? Like we can learn hard things, or like coach keeps me safe. I do a lot of that kind of talk where I say coach keeps me, and then they'll say safe, and then I'll say even when I'm, and they'll say scared, and then that like it kind of like we try to use those mantras over and over, especially for the kids that are just overly anxious in the water.
Awesome.
And I think that works into the same stuff. You know, so you know, I can learn hard things. Coach keeps me safe. Like, you know, coach keeps me safe when we learn new things, you know, kind of stuff like that.
That's awesome.
And then they start building that confidence in the water, and then all of a sudden you start to see it on land. That's kind of cool too. So
yeah, it's amazing how that works. It almost sounds like a piece of was it neurolinguistic programming, NLP? Are you familiar with that at all?
I just kind of have a bunch of so the way my brain works, I don't always remember the title of something, but I could give you all of the characteristics, right? Like I might not remember your name, but I could tell you 14 things you told me about yourself today, and I can remember because of your face. Like I'll be like, oh, that person, and I know I have all these things, and then I put connections together in different ways.
It's funny.
I don't always remember the overarching title, right? Like, but I remember things, and then I put things together. I always tell people my brain works like a Rubik's cube, but it's constantly shuffling around, and then I get a new line of information, and it's a whole different set of information, and now the whole cube has to get shuffled around again. And so my cube just keeps getting bigger and bigger, and the pieces keep getting smaller, and but they keep making new patterns and connections, and then they shuffle around, and then it changes again, you know, and I start putting new things into place, and all that kind of stuff. And it's just like pieces and parts from everything come together with what I do.
That's awesome.
Really cool.
Now,
really cool.
You mentioned that your adoption is an open adoption.
Correct.
Now, that's something that, again, we don't have any real experience with. Most of our adoptions have some unsafe connections in the family. Mm-hmm. Most of it based around substance abuse and, people with some real addiction issues. And, you know, there's some obvious reasons why you want to maybe protect some, especially young kids from bio parents who are addicted. It's, you know, they have their demons they have to work out first before they're a safe place. But it sounds like you've still been able to keep a real good relationship with your daughter over the last 8 years.
Yeah, it's been good. They used to live in Cleveland. So I live in Youngstown, Ohio. So Cleveland's about an hour and a half away. So when I was first pregnant, they lived in Cleveland. So we were able to build, now me being 29, it was a little easier to build a relationship with someone that's about my age range, right? Her parents are a year and 2 years older than me. So we're about the same age. So that made things a little easier from the get-go, right? It wasn't like a child or a 20-something with a 30-something, like trying to, we have similar parents, like Abby's parents, like all of our grandparents have some similar stuff, right? Societally wise, we were all about the same kind of stuff. So it made it easy to build a relationship with her parents. And then when she was born, they lived here for about 2 more years. So they were around a lot, or like I could stop by whenever I wanted, or they would come to some family things and stuff like that, because we were all so like geographically close. And then they moved to Colorado. And that was actually right when we started our retreats for the first time, was when I found out they were moving to Colorado. And then that's actually been good because it's given me space to like not always have to be Caroline birth mom. Like I get to be a birth mom. Like I'm always a birth mom, but it wasn't like always in my face. Like anytime I went to Cleveland, I should go see her, like, but I was there for work or something, you know, like it gives me an opportunity to be like completely focused on her when I go to Colorado, and then continue to have a relationship off of an in-person visit. But it also gives me space to like grow and be myself outside of adoption, because it's not all of me. It's part of me. It'll always be part of me, but it's not all of me. But yeah, so she's fantastic. She's 8. She's funny. She's smart. She's a reader. We both read a lot. So I get to send her books in the mail all the time, and that stuff's kind of fun, or pass on my old books to her. And she gets excited. I was just FaceTiming with her the other day, and she got the 2 books in the mail like the day they just happened to show up while we were FaceTiming. It wasn't planned. And she was so excited to like get books in the mail, and it's kind of cool too, because she knows she's adopted, right? Like it's normal. That conversation is just normal for her. And her mom sent me a picture the other day. She'd written something for school where she was talking about how she has 2 moms and how much she knows how much I love her because of the things we say, and how I'm so smart because I always answer all her questions.
I work really hard to convince my children I'm a genius and I know all the answers.
Yeah, I don't even try to pretend like I'm a genius. And she just, and then, what else did she say? Oh, because she said that she was special because she was the only child that I ever had, and like that I was ever going to have. And so that was extra special for her. So it's kind of sweet seeing her write. Those are her words, right? Like we've been very careful to we give her terminology, but we let her develop her own language through it. And let her, like, I was never like Lauren, my friend Lauren's situation, she's Mama Lauren, and I'm just Caroline, like, and not just, but we never gave her a name or a term. It was just Caroline. And then eventually, you know, it was Caroline you grew in Caroline's belly, and then Caroline's your birth mom. And now she's come up with her own language surrounding it. And that's, was something that we all wanted for her, was to have her be able to define it herself, and navigate it on her own, and be able to create that for herself. And I'm glad, you know, for that. So I always figured I'd come up with some weird nickname, like she wouldn't be able to say my name or something, and I'd, you know, be like Kiki or something weird, but it never happened. I've just always been Caroline or Carrie, and you know, that's it. And it's okay. Like I didn't want, aunt was wrong, you know, like birth mom felt sterile. I didn't want the title mama or mommy, like it was weird to me. So we just kind of let it be, and well, that's how it is. And it's
you know,
good, it's hers.
Exactly. And with foster kids who come through our house, you know, we have a brand new placement who's only been here, what, a day and a half?
Today would be day 3.
Okay. I lose track. but we found that with these kids, a lot of times, like, you can call me, my name is Jason. I can be Mr. Palmer. I can be Dad. I can be Daddy. And then we usually throw one in there that because I tried to be a smart aleck to my wife once, whose name is Amanda, and I tried to get my nieces to call her Aunt Meanie. And before they left the house, she was still Aunt Amanda, and I was suddenly Unky Monkey. And so Monkey's another one that's been thrown at me. And we hand them a handful of terms because, you know, these kids are, you know, in our situation, these kids are stepping into a totally strange situation. Sure. They don't know anything. Absolutely. So we try and just kind of shotgun, hey, here's a handful of things. Call me whatever. I don't really care that much. I am not as tied up on you have to show me respect and I'm Mr. Palmer. I was raised that way, and in a lot of situations, it's appropriate to call somebody Mr. or Mrs. You know, your school teacher. Yeah, you probably shouldn't call her by her first name. That's not going to go over well. But in this setting, you know, we tend to let kids pick their name that they use, and ironically, usually by, you know, day 2 or 3, at least by then, Amanda has become mom, and usually a day or 2 later, I become dad, And with quite a few of them, it was, you were just called Dad because we have a lot of kids in the house. And that's what they hear me called. Like, it's just natural. And Mom and Dad tends to be the name that people give to the person who put food in front of them. That's really what it means, I think, in that young brain. And biological parents oftentimes get the name, Daddy Chris, Daddy John, whatever. And as the case progresses, we eventually, if they're going back home, we really work to kind of change that around to where I become Daddy Jason and then Dad becomes Dad again. And just to give them that peace so that they can feel comfortable in it. But it's not something that we ever felt was terribly important to give them a name they have to use, but rather to allow them to, just like you said, have their own verbiage that they use. It's their name, so they don't feel uncomfortable, like they're being forced into something.
Right. Well, and I think it gives ownership, right? And so when you give kids ownership of a situation and like you put that trust into them, because that's what you're saying essentially, is like you trust them to decide what your name should be, and you're showing that mutual respect to them, and I think that just works better in the long run for everybody. Like the kind of thing, like you just give them trust and love, and then they'll feel that you trust them and that you care for them. And then that becomes their language because that's what they embrace. And then that becomes their truth, and their truth is what's most important, right? Like getting them to trust you and let them care for you and let you help them. And so you have to give them that power essentially to define some of the things, right? Especially if they've never been able to define anything in their whole lives, right? If you give them the opportunity to define some things, now they feel power, and like not in a bad way power, but like empowered to like take control of things and maybe, grow from there. Like, oh, I can help this situation's okay. This situation's safe. Like they give me, right? Especially if they've never had any power or control over anything. Now they have some control and power. I'm like, oh, I feel safe. Okay.
And ultimately, that's kind of our goal, is to, with our kids, if you live here full time, or if you're, a kid who's visiting for a while, our goal is to find a way to push you along the path where we can launch you out into the world as a good human who can go out and make a change in the world. And that starts with believing that you're empowered to make a change.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. And you just have to have that, and you have to have people behind you that are saying it's okay to make that change. It's okay to be different. It's okay to have your own language. It's your truth. And not everybody gets that if they haven't had trauma, around or experienced it, that's okay. It's okay if the words aren't quite right, or, it's their words. It's what's important. It's the ownership of that. So.
I just had that conversation the other day with somebody about the importance of telling your truth, of being willing to stand up and tell your truth, because yours is so uniquely your truth. My story is so completely different than anyone else's. And I've found that through that, I can really connect with other people and find someone whom I can connect and communicate, and they'll learn something from me and I'll learn something from them, as opposed to your typical human interaction, which sounds like, hi, how are you? I'm fine. You? I'm doing good. Mm-hmm. And that's so superficial and doesn't make a difference in the world anywhere.
No, it doesn't. And that's, when I first started facilitating retreats, I never talked about how I didn't want to be a mom, right? Like I just left that out because I would see all of these women like wishing dearly that they were in a space where they could be a mom. And I was like, no, that was pretty good. Like I had two choices. Like I could either abort or make an adoption plan. Like parenting wasn't really like it was at first, right? Like I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to parent. And then I was like, like that's not good. And so once like I made the decision, right? Like, so I didn't used to tell people that because I was almost ashamed of it, because I miss my daughter, right? Like I love my daughter. I miss her. We have a wonderful relationship, but I know that making an adoption plan was the best choice for both of us. And like at my core, I know that. But these other women just would be so devastated and upset. And I'd be like, I can't tell them that like this has been one of the best decisions I've ever made, like that feels awful and icky. And then the one day I finally said it. And like when we share our stories on the first night, and we write notes to each other at the end of retreat that you get to take home. So like everybody writes a small, like on a note card to somebody else. And so because I facilitate retreats, I have a giant stack of cards. But the one girl's like, I'm so glad you said that because I thought I was the only one. And I realized by me holding that back, like all those other women that I had interacted with for those couple of years that I never said that, like I didn't want to be a mom, that I was withholding the opportunity for them to connect with me right? Like for them to realize they weren't the only one. Because I was feeling like I was the only one. So like until I said this was part of my core decision, they didn't have the ability to say me too, right? Like I'm not the only one. So now there's a group of us that like we just connect in a different way because we never wanted to be moms, and we got pregnant, even though we were preventing it in every way possible. So it's part of it, right? You got your truth and you have to speak it fully. But you also have to choose when you speak it fully too. So, you have to know your audience and everything else. And, it took a long time for me to be able to say those things and be able to be like completely okay with the fact that like I didn't want to be a mom, and, say that like, and really be frustrated with the system because that, all these doctors said I couldn't get my tubes tied when I wanted them tied and that kind of stuff.
Well, and I know, and I know that you said that, you knew that you didn't want to be a mom. And so you chose your plan, which is awesome. Some people don't feel like they have that choice. But even though you knew you didn't want to be a mom and you made that plan, did you still experience, some grief and some loss?
All the time. I mean, like, I can't visit her. Like, I usually visit this time of year, and I have to cancel my visit because of the coronavirus. And I've been a blubbering mess about it and I'm a lot like your husband, where I don't like feelings and emotions, right? Like I like logic. So when they're like exploding inside of me, like I'm like, what are these things? Like, like what is going on? Like go away. And trying to work on embracing those sucky feelings too. But like I still have them. Like I miss her. I definitely love her and care about her and try to do things that good moms do, right? Like if I say I'm going to call, I make sure I call, I show up when I say I'm going to show up, and I try to make sure I'm connecting with her to the best of my ability. But it's still hard. I leave, I cry every time I leave for a couple days. Even when I'm there, I have to take breaks and like go find some space by myself because it's a lot.
Right.
When I first had her, I remember being like the whole time I was pregnant, I was like, I can't wait to get this thing out of me, right? Like so I can go back to myself. and then it turns out like, oh, this thing changes you, right? Like, and like realizing that was like the first piece of all of this. And then realizing like, oh, like there is grief and there is loss in this. Like, even though I didn't want to be a mom, that doesn't mean that biologically my emotions didn't, right? Like, cause if I didn't want her to have a life at all, like there wouldn't have been anything, right? Like we still bonded. She was inside of me. Like
right.
I fed her in the hospital. We were there. I visited a lot. I don't know. It's definitely, I feel mine is different because of the not wanting to be a mom, but it doesn't mean I don't still have those feelings. Like I'm not heartless.
Right.
And I didn't, I still experience grief and loss through it, and it hits at weird times, I've never had a problem on her birthday, and this year was hard, and I don't know why. It was before all this stuff hit, so it's not even that. This was a hard year. Like it was just kind of, I don't know. I think it's 8 for me. Like most people say they get like the 5s, the 10s, the 15s are hard, and I think for me 8 is when I really start to remember my childhood, and like, and I see a lot of her childhood paralleling things in my childhood and just school, and so like I'm starting to feel like I'm missing things where I didn't feel like I was missing first steps and stuff like that. Like now I'm starting to feel like I'm missing her life a little bit more because these are the things I remember. And but that's where I think the openness is good because her brain is wired very differently than a lot of her family, and so she gets to see that her brain is like my brain, right? Like that love of reading and things like that. And I think that makes the grief and the ucky feelings worth it when I see those things. And she gets to see that that's where she comes from, and that helps balance out those icky feelings. Because most of the time it's okay, but it sucks sometimes.
Well, I think it's important for people to realize that there is grief and there is loss, because so many people, we say that, your story is not our story, which is, it's true. Everybody's story is different. But just from listening to people and hearing people talk, a lot of people feel, well, you chose this. You chose this plan. This was your choice. And so, why would you be sad? Why would you grieve?
Oh, yes.
And I
it
just
doesn't mean it
feel
doesn't
like
suck.
Right.
or have hard moments or... Yeah. I mean, it's just like parenting, right? Like you chose to be a parent. It doesn't mean it's not hard some days and full of, like it works both ways. It's just, but yeah, I think a lot of times too for people, it's easier to pass judgment than to learn, right? Like to sit in the space is really uncomfortable for them. So they don't want to hear about the grief and the trauma and how hard it really can be some days, because that stuff's hard to hear. And then when you force them to hear it, it's uncomfortable for them and they don't always like that. And that's where that, like, what you chose this comes from, right? It's that let's put up a wall so we don't have to talk about the hard things.
Yeah, we don't have to talk about it. We don't have to deal with it. We could just push this aside and move on to the next thing, right. But I do think it's really important, and it's very important to validate those feelings because they're real. They are definitely real.
Yeah, and even for a lot of people, right? Like we still have feelings.
Absolutely.
Not
a robot.
Sometimes more intense, I think, because like when they do creep outside of your logic, like they're like bam, and they're in your face, and you're like, what are these things, and what is going on, and your whole world is rocked because you're not used to living in that world of feelings all the time, and then
I had a friend of mine who explained it to me this way. He said, I think you have deeper, stronger feelings than most. You just don't choose to allow them out for other people to experience very often. And that made a lot of sense to me. But I
had multiple people tell me that.
I really like the line that you said earlier. It's easier to pass judgment than it is to learn.
Yeah.
And that says a whole lot about, the experience that you're talking about, I think, because it's super easy to say, well, there's something wrong with you because you're not like me, instead of understanding that you're not like me in a lot of ways. If you looked in your pantry, if you looked in your pantry, you probably have a different set of foods in it than we do. You probably have a different wardrobe than we wear. You have a lot of things in your life. You like different music, you like different movies, and we're wired differently, and that's all okay. And I think that the way that you've been able to hold that down within the open adoption, be able to have that good relationship with your daughter's adoptive parents, with your daughter, with the people around you, and just open that up for people to see, that's really just showing your ability to be vulnerable around other people.
My adoption is like the first place I was really truly vulnerable, right? Like that I have to trust her parents to do the best job they can, right? Like even if I maybe don't like something they do or whatever, like it's not my decision, and I hope I don't show them those things. Like there's not very many things ever that I don't agree with, but I hope if I'm like, ooh, I don't like that, like it doesn't show on my face, right? Because I do trust them to raise her, and if we've had to have hard conversations, we've been able to do them face to face, and and we just fix the relationship from there. And I think that says a lot for our trust in each other, right? In that relationship we built while I was pregnant, that we can have those hard conversations. They also got pregnant right after adopting Abby. So at one point there were 2 kids under the age of 1 in their house.
Oh, wow.
Right. It was only like for a month, but that was pretty.
Still crazy.
I was like, woo! And so what, when we're talking, her parents and I are talking, like a lot of times, Abby's adoptive parents, right? So biological grandparents of Abby's parents will be visiting, and they'll see, oh, you do that to her sister, right? Like a lot, like that looks just like daddy, or mommy looked just like that when she was little. So like, if we didn't have this openness, like it wouldn't be like, she'd be like, well, what about me? Like, why don't I do that thing like mommy or daddy? And like, instead that's like, you do that like Caroline, and that's like Caroline. And like that facial expression is like the same one you and Caroline both make. And so, she's just got that opportunity to, I couldn't have picked better parents in all honesty. Like, I realize how like lucky I am every day.
What did that process look like? Because a lot of people don't know anything about that.
So for me, it was very, so we were talking earlier before we started recording about personalities and things. And my Myers-Briggs is an INTJ. So I'm introverted, intuitive thinking, and judging, not judgmental, but like judging in a sense of looking at all sides of a story before making a decision. And so I did a lot of intuitive, like looking back, a lot of the decisions I made were very intuitive. And that's probably one of the first times I really started trusting my gut and learning that my gut was not wrong. And I remember like calling, and I don't like to say the names of the bad agencies, right? But like saying like, I want an open adoption. They're like, well, you're this horrible person. You can't have an open adoption. Like, that's just wrong. It's a sin. And I'm like, no, click,
Right.
Found the adoption agency I work with now with retreats, caring for kids in Cuyahoga Falls. And I remember I was teaching GED classes at the time. I was like in my office and I was like repeatedly calling this agency, like, is this social worker in yet? Is this social worker in yet? Like, is she in yet? Because I just, like, what I was reading about them on the internet, and like, that was like what I needed, right? Like, I needed that person. And then a person, her name was Abby too. So that's kind of tricky. But so I remember her calling me and me just being like, oh, thank goodness. Like, I can talk to somebody about this. Like, and then meeting with them. And then I remember the very first day we met at Zoop, and we were in like Solon, and, like, she's like, can't see this paperwork. And she's like, okay, well, like, this is where you like fill out what you want about parents. Like, you can take it home and think about it. I was like, I'm good. Like, I'd already like I knew exactly what I was looking for by the time I got there. And I remember just filling out this paperwork very, like, I was very sure of what I wanted for her. It was all things that I would have wanted had I been the right parent. Right. But like, I didn't have to think about it. Like, I knew, and I didn't care if they were gay or straight or what kind of money they made. It was about like, is there going to be music in the house? Like, will you take them swimming? Like, are you going to encourage learning? Like, very different kinds of things. And then I got my books, and I remember being really excited to get my books, and I sat there with Post-its and like ranked them. And Abby's adoptive parents had the number one Post-it, and I remember messaging my social worker and saying, do they live in the area? Because I wanted, at the time, like, the quick, easy visits of, not that they're easy, but the drop in, I'm here, I'm in Cleveland, let's have dinner, kind of things. Kind of like extended family. And she was like, yeah, they live here. And so we met them, and that was it. Like, it was like a perfect first date. Like, we left Macaroni Grill, and like the three of us went over to Starbucks, and like, I looked up and they were like, Starbucks was closed. And so it was like closing down the bar, right? But like but at Starbucks, if you're pregnant. Like, I swam in my alumni college meet the same weekend. Like, I was like, oh boy, it was like a whole bunch of stuff. But like, it was just, and it was them. Like, I just knew intuitively that was the right people. And I hear that over and over with birth moms, that when they find that couple, they just know. And that's how it is. You just know, just like, when you find your your person in the world, you just know. So for me, it was very like, it wasn't even methodical. It just kind of snowballed, right? Like, it just kept building, and it was just there. And I met them the day I found out she was a girl. And I remember thinking like, oh, thank goodness I'm making an adoption plan with a girl. Cause I couldn't, like, I don't know how I'd parent someone like me. Right. Like, oh boy. Right. I was like, whew. And now I'm like, oh, she's so much like me. But, I don't know. So for me, it was just very, very, like, I knew what I wanted, and they just happened to have those things, and I didn't have to really search.
I geek out on the science stuff every now and then. And when you talk about that gut feeling, there's actually some science behind that now. The gut is what produces all the chemicals that your brain needs, or at least a high percentage of them. And the vagus nerve runs right down in and connects into your gut, into your intestines, where the dopamine and serotonin, and I'll get some of this wrong, so don't take me to science class, but a lot of those chemicals are produced there. So when we have that gut feeling, it's not just some weird random thing that, it doesn't make sense if you don't know it. Everybody assumes that all of your brain is somewhere, between your eyebrows and just behind your ears, but your nervous system, the whole thing is a piece of it. So when you have that gut feeling, that's part of your thinking brain actually creating chemicals in your body saying, hey, this feels real. And that's why we learn to trust our gut.
Right. This feels real. This feels right. This feels truthful. Right. Like that, like, you don't have that. It took a long time for me to learn that was the right, that feeling of knowing, right? Like, I just knew is the right, like, it's almost like a balance of chemicals. Right. So if you want to look at it that way, like, things just balance. That whole, like, you just know, right? Like, I think it's that, like, calm. If you think about, like, chemicals and everything's perfectly balanced, it's just, right? It's that calm water for me.
I'm curious, do you have a good relationship with your parents?
Yeah, for the most part.
What were their feelings when you told them that you were planning on adopting your daughter?
My dad's always been really supportive in general. He's like, I don't know how anybody can say anything bad about your adoption plan. Like, it worked out great. Like, you made a good choice. Like, you made a thoughtful decision. You made very grown-up, logical decisions. I know it's been a lot harder for my mom. But my mom, like, her role in life is caretaker. So I really think that she would have embraced getting, like, parenting her, but they were in their, like, early 60s, like late 50s. Like, I was like, I can't, like, you'd have to work till you're 80. Like, I'm not gonna do that to you guys, right? Like, I'm almost 30, like kind of thing. They still have a relationship. They video chat and things like that, so that's kind of cool. So Abby still gets to know them and things like that too. I know my dad went out there skiing a couple years ago, and they, like, all went to lunch or whatever together, and that was kind of cool. So my mom hasn't been out to visit in a few years, but they FaceTime. They probably actually FaceTime with them more than I do because they're retired. So it's different, right? It's just different. Yeah. So, and then my grandma still likes to see pictures and things of her and stuff like that. And sometimes I'll be at my grandma's and we'll FaceTime just so grandma can see her for a second. Abby doesn't really know who she is. She knows she gets cards from her in the mail, but she doesn't really have it.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's this really old lady on the video chat, like, randomly once in a while, but doesn't really grasp. It's, you know, she knows it's, like, my grandma and my mom's mom. So, like, she knows, but I don't think she really, like, it's just not the embrace like it is with all of the rest of us. But
yeah, that's pretty amazing, though. It sounds like your family's pretty supportive, and I know that's not always the case. So
yeah, they were. You know, it was hard in the plan, you know, in the moments of it, especially with me and my mom. But we both have very different views on life and how things should work, and that's not, the adoption plan is not in its own bubble with my mom, right? Like, that's just me and my mom. We operate very differently. So you take the adoption out of it and it's just part of our relationship. We just have very different views, and I've very much marched the the beat of my own drum, and she's more, you know, aligned with other things. And it just, so that doesn't, it's not exclusive of my adoption plan, like, to have that, I don't know how, like, ripples and things like that in there, you know, that's just part of our relationship in general. It's not that we don't love each other. It's just, sometimes it's a little abrasive, you know, where my dad and I tend to be he's much more logical. So we tend to get that part of things just works easier for us because we have that same, like, wavelength of understanding. Yeah. So that's just where my brother and my mom are both more of the emotional side of things. So they tend to get each other a little bit more, right? Theirs is a little less abrasive. So that's just, it's just relationships. It's not necessarily adoption related.
Yeah. Well, one question I always like to ask everybody who comes on here is, what is a piece of wisdom that you can give to the listeners that you specifically have learned through your experience?
Do you have a time for a book? Because one thing for listeners. Repeat your question one more time.
What is one piece of wisdom that you could give to the listeners that you specifically have learned through your experience?
Okay, so I'll use the birth mom lens since I live the birth mom side. That birth moms in general are not bad people. And most of us, even the women that I know that struggle with addiction, are trying to make good decisions as parents for their children. Whether parenting looks like 3 days of, 78 hours of I'm legally your mom and now I'm not, or whether it's, I'm struggling with addiction and I don't want to lose you, but I can't, and I don't have a choice, 6 years down the road, that really everybody's doing the best they can as parents, and that 90% of the time we're just trying to do the best we can, and that we're not bad people at our core. We're doing what we can to survive, and that kind of thing, and in that moment. And so, like, we're real humans too, I guess, is we have feelings. And especially once a child's adopted, it doesn't mean that birth mom is insignificant, or even if removed from in a CPS situation, even temporary, right? Like, that birth mom is still a human that has feelings. And so, remembering that we're people, and it doesn't end once that child's removed, for us. that there's still feelings and ties and emotions, and whether you see your child or not, like they still care, right? The women that I know that haven't seen their kids in 30 years or 40 years still care deeply for their children. They're not never on their mind. And I think that part in our society is missing a lot. Like there's not a lot of looking back at the birth mom, right? Like it's very child-centered, as it should be, but there's still a birth mom and a birth father behind the scenes that has feelings, and we often get overlooked. And I think it's because it's hard and nobody wants to think about how we feel. But we're still human and we're still here, and we still matter, and we still matter to your children, because whether it's good or bad stuff from our past, like those are your kids. We talk about puzzle pieces, right? Those are your kids' puzzle pieces. And so you need to have those puzzle pieces for your child so that they can be their whole person. So whatever that has to look like for your situation, like making sure you keep those birth parents' puzzle pieces for your child and accessible and whatever safe, right? Because foster is different with that part. Keeping those puzzle pieces and having those available for your child and age appropriate terms, that kind of stuff.
Well, absolutely, because it is important for their story too. They want to know where they come from, why they make this facial expression, why their hair is this color, and that's part of their story, that's part of their puzzle, and whether it's foster, adoption, everybody wants to know where they come from, and they want to know those pieces.
My best friend growing up was adopted, right? And it was a closed adoption, and they've since they're in reunion. And I actually know her birth mom now because of the work I do, which is really cool to like, and like I know the mom, right? So I have like all three pieces, and I've, she's been my friend since we were in third grade. And it wasn't until she found her birth mom found her, that she got puzzle pieces about her medical history. And then all the things they were struggling to figure out, right? Like, so even though it was just medical history puzzle pieces for her, fell into place, and now she is able to get answers for her medical stuff, and then now she can have a relationship with her birth mom too. But like now there's more puzzle pieces, right? But things that nobody knew, because 30 years ago you didn't get medical history, so even in a closed adoption. So it was just like even just that part of it, right? Like I saw those puzzle pieces fall into place for my friend, and that was huge, and if anything showed me more of like making sure I was available for my own daughter for her puzzle pieces.
Well, yeah, because everybody, I shouldn't say everybody, but I would say most people, they want to know, the whys and the whats and the whos and the hows, and
even the bad stuff, right? You need to know,
absolutely.
Like you want to know the good and the bad, because that puts your whole piece, your whole puzzle together.
Like, especially when you're growing up and as a teenager and you're trying to find yourself, and we've found on our side that's such an important thing. And when you don't have those answers to give, when you're like, I really don't know, sweetheart.
Yeah, we've really been fortunate. Two of our kids that were adopted, they're bio siblings, and we're in a small town, and their dad was murdered when they were very young. And as it turns out, our son, he has a friend in school, and his dad was best friends all growing up throughout the years with our son's bio dad. And so there's all kinds of pieces that he can get from him. And they're very, he's very closely connected with this kid's dad. His name is Duke. And Duke is a sports guy. He played sports with our kid's dad, and he coaches some of their sports, and he can look and say, yeah, you're a lot like him. You're short, you're ridiculously fast, and you can't catch a football to save your life. Your dad was just like that. You hand him the ball and let him run, that's great, but throw it to him and it'll bounce off of his hands. Yeah, they both played basketball, and neither one of them really liked basketball nearly as much as football. But he has all those pieces to go, okay, right, this is a piece of my history. This is a part of who my dad was, who I am, and it gives him that knowledge of, yeah, I'm like somebody in the past, and understanding your history is, we have entire companies, 23andMe 23andMe is one, and what's the other one?
Ancestry.
There you go, Ancestry.com.
Yeah.
That's one of the other big ones, and entire industries built around learning who you came from.
Yep.
And knowing that, my brother did My brother did one of them. I did the other one. But he said he traced, our some of our family's history all the way back to where they came over and came into the U.S. through Ellis Island and all that. And he had all kinds of different interesting pieces and parts that explain a lot of, part of like what I look like. Because I have two other siblings that look very similar to me. My brother he's a younger, thinner version of me. And then my younger sister, she's younger, thinner, and much more attractive. Thank God for her. She doesn't have near the beard that I do. But our older sister is much whiter. She's a much fairer complexion. And to look at it, we look like, what happened here? But, to be able to put all those pieces together and go, okay, there might be some of this in our background, and the DNA just turned because I'm kind of ambiguously brown, whereas my sister is my older sister is much fairer. And we look at that, and you can kind of put the pieces together and say, okay, well, this has something to do with our heritage here, and maybe we have a little bit of, I think it was the Iberian Peninsula, which is pieces of, a little piece of maybe some Spanish history somewhere way back in our background, but things that we never knew. My grandparents never said anything about that. They hadn't, they probably hadn't heard it because it was so many generations ago. But owning that piece of who I am is nice to be able to answer the question when people go, well, what are you anyways? I've been asked that question a lot over the years, and I've never been able to answer it until things like Ancestry and 23andMe came around, and you can go, okay, sure. Now I know a piece of who I am. That's bigger than I thought it was, to be able to say, I know that piece of who I am. And
it's really kind of neat that science-wise, right? Like a science geek, that we can figure that out and see where we came from, really.
And how much more important are all the pieces of who I am as far as who my parents are and the stories that I come from and why I like these different weird things. And that's just, it's all those pieces and parts that you have the opportunity to help your daughter put together that a lot of kids don't have that ability.
Yeah. I wish all kids could have that ability. I wish enough adoptive parents were secure enough in their own stuff to let that openness exist like I have with my daughter, because I also recognize that comes with a lot of trust and security in Abby's parents to let us have that type of relationship, where she can Skype me whenever she wants and we can talk for 30 minutes and nobody's like looking over her shoulder to see what we're talking about, right? Like it's always been okay.
Because some people would be threatened by that. They would be threatened by birth mom or birth dad.
Well, right, or even the fact that she wrote this Valentine's Day thing about how she has two moms, and her first mom, who she calls Brooke her first mom, or whatever language she uses, like that's her like mom, and like she's this, and then the rest of it was all about me, and like for her to not be upset by that and to share that with me, right? Like I would have never even known that existed, that writing, but to share that with me and to let me have that like piece of my daughter too, right? Like she's giving me pieces of my daughter, so that my puzzle is building as well, and I have that part of my puzzle that can grow and put together, and very grateful and thankful for those parts of it too. Last visit I said, why don't I ever, does she talk about that she's adopted at school? She said, yeah. And I said, well, why don't I go read stories or something to the kids at school? Like, she's like, I never even thought of that, right? But it wasn't until I was leaving, and I said, well, next time maybe I'll come and I can meet her friends and classmates. Like we never even have that, like never even occurred to me that the visit could extend outside of just our little unit, and I could meet her friends and like I'm okay with that. Like it doesn't bother me. And that, if she's proud of me and wants to share me, then that's okay. She could say no, right? Like she's like, no, I don't want you to come to school. I'm like, okay. But if she did, that'd be okay too. And so.
Well, don't be surprised if a kid says, I don't want you to meet my friends at school, because that's something they all say eventually. At 8, you probably still have a good chance, but give it a few years.
I feel she's 8. I think I'm still good. 12, 13. Yeah. But
then it's like, really, Mom?
Right. Yeah. No, that's the whole, I have a friend whose daughter just turned 18, and she was talking about the power shift. And I said, I think that happens even without, it's a closed adoption. I said, I think that power shift happens whether you have an adoption or not. Like, I think back to when you were 18 and your power shift, right? You turn 18 and you're an adult, and you're still living with your parents, and it's a hard place to navigate, right? Like
we have a 19-year-old, yes. We know exactly what you're talking about.
There's a power shift, yeah. So it's just not adoption related. Sometimes I think too, when we're talking about the advice, take the adoption lens off sometimes for people. Like, it's a relationship. It's just another relationship. Like, if you can remove that adoption piece out of it and look at it as another relationship with your, like, would your friend be able to do this with, obviously safety stuff first, but like, is your friend able to share pictures of the child on social media? Then it shouldn't matter so much if the birth mom parents are, sharing. Obviously, if there's safety and drugs and whatever for protection purposes, but those type of things, right? Like if you can think of it as another relationship instead of a adoption relationship, it becomes a lot less scary, I think, and just makes it a little easier to navigate.
Absolutely.
It's hard sometimes, right, to take that piece of like those adoption goggles off and be like, oh wait, this is normal. It just looks different because it's from an adoption point of view or a foster care point of view, but it's still similar to what this is age appropriate. This is, kind of thing. So.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that you want people to know that you think that, they just don't get, or?
I just know, I guess, like, if I had to say one thing, like, I never grew up like thinking I was going to be a birth mom, right, and have this adoption plan be such a piece of my life, and especially never even imagined that it would turn into this work I do. But like, because of those decisions, I have I don't even like to use the word tribe anymore because it gets some PC issues, but I have a tribe of women that get it and that like fully accept me for who I am, like in that moment. Like, they've seen me coming out of an abusive relationship. They've seen me when I'm thriving. And they are some of the best women I've ever met. And like, they love me and care for me because of my otherness and like not in spite of my otherness, if that makes sense. Like, so for me, like I've always said, the water is where I belong, right? That's where I belong. But then this group of women that I know now because of this thing that happened to me, that I made the best choice I can, like, they're my belonging, right? They're the place that I fit unapologetically. I never have to apologize for me or how I'm wired or those kind of things. And that's a really special space to be in and to have found, and didn't even know I was missing it until like, I remember like looking around the one last birth mom retreat and I was like, wow, I never have to fake a thing here. Like, I don't have to pretend to be, like, if I'm cranky, it's okay. And if I'm not cranky, it's okay. And I don't ever have to apologize for my behavior that maybe comes off a little not societally normal because of how I'm wired or whatever. And it's just kind of a neat space to have. And I hope
that's awesome.
Like, I hope if there's other birth moms out there like listening to this, that whether it's a choice to have an adoption plan or was not, that like we would welcome them in our space, because that the world needs more of that.
How would they find you?
Yeah, so we our retreats are through Caring for Kids. So we call them Caring for Birthmothers. So right now it's on the Caring for Kids website, which I'll send you guys a link for that.
Okay, we'll make sure to put that in the show notes.
Yeah, in the show notes. And then we have a public Facebook group, Caring for Birthmothers, that Lauren, that I mentioned before, runs. Mostly she admins. And then that's a good place to find us too. And it's a really kind space, because a lot of the adoption spaces for birth moms are not always kind. And not that you can't post negative things, but it's very, the tone is a very welcoming tone, and kind. And then from there, that's probably the best two ways to find things. So, but I'll get you guys links in the show notes.
Awesome. Good deal.
All right. Well, we appreciate you coming on here today and spending some time with us. And I can't wait to put this out there, because I think that the birth mom side of the story is one of the parts that's not very well told. It's not very well understood. And if more either adoptive families or even foster parents can understand that better, it will only serve to help the children have a better long-term outcome.
I agree fully. Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Thanks so much for your time today. I hope you guys gained some real value out of this interview. If so, be sure and reach out and let us know at fostercareuj@gmail.com. Or if you have a story you'd like to highlight, let us know. We'd be interested in talking to you. Don't forget to check us out at fostercarenation.com. remember to share this with your friends and on your social medias. And if you happen to be an iTunes user, please leave us a rate and review. We look forward to seeing you guys next week. Remember, we put out a new show every week on Friday. And as always,